Hello, friends and extended family. I have finally finished Anne Heffron's book, You Don't Look Adopted, a Memoir. And I, I, I guess I have been trying to consider why it's taken me so long to read this particular book. And I think it's because it's the whole story. It's the whole story of an adopted person and their struggles and challenges and feelings about it. And there's so much familiarity for me there, and I think that the book is something I kind of looked at as a treat, and I took on a big chunk to begin with, and then slowly kind of nibbled at it as I went, enjoying it, absorbing it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the issues that Anne brings up. And since I'd done my little prelude of the first, little chunk I'd taken out, since then I've been able to converse slightly a little bit with Anne. So now it makes it even a little bit more difficult that you know I've had contact with the author. So anyways, there was a few things in it that well, a lot of things in it that I greatly related with, and there was little parts that kind of jumped out at me a little bit more than others, and one of those parts was when Anne here is discussing a doll that she had in her house that she'd become attached to, and it was an antique, and it obviously had some special significance for her. And at a certain point, she goes into it, and I don't know if anyone else had this sort of revelation as an adoptee, and I don't know if a regular person would really feel the same, but she became extremely upset when her father had apparently given away the doll and was, inconsolable, as she described herself, I believe, or that was the impression I got. And then later on, the adoptive father had found the doll and offered to send it to her, and at that point, she didn't care about the doll. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I've had similar experiences over my adoption. Whereas I'll give you a quick example. We had a garage fire when I was a teenager, and the car had caught in fire, and I had been coming upstairs from my room in the basement, and I happened to notice light shining under the garage door, and it was obviously a fire. So I woke the family. There was a garage fire. Everything in it was wrecked and covered in soot and smoke, and so pretty much everything in that garage had to be replaced. Now, I wasn't really involved in it too much, but at a certain point, the things in the garage were replaced and possessions. And when I asked them about it, their excuse was that they had to pay out of pocket and then be reimbursed for the things. So they didn't have much money because, as I've mentioned before, I was adopted into a poor family. And anyways, I don't think that's the real point. My sister's boyfriend at the time had some things in the garage, and he had those things replaced, and they replaced those things for him. So I don't know if Anne was trying to relay this feeling or sensation, but for myself, anyways, I grew up in a very materialistic, shallow, atheistic type home, whereas there wasn't much to it. And these people valued money, possessions. They never really had much, but they valued it and chased it. And for me, it wasn't about the things. It was about the inconsideration of me, um, because that's how they show what they value when it comes to things. And obviously, when it came to my things, they didn't see any sense of value, and thus, in a way, it sort of reinforces the sense that I was not valued as a member of the family. And I wonder. I related with that story about a thing and how upsetting it was that that thing was not valued or appreciated, um, and had a sense of relation to that. Um, I also got to see Anne on a live stream where we talked a lot about farting, and then I was surprised to find she had an entire chapter about farting. So apparently she's very gassy. But anyways, just kidding. She does talk, and again, this is something that stuck out in the book for me, that she talked about adoptees with stomach issues. And yes, yes, I've also had nutrition slash stomach issues slash bowel issues. Uh, she throws in there. Well, I don't want to spoil the whole thing. Um, I had issues surrounding my stomach and my bowel movements as a child and as a grown man that you know I struggled to um, well, I ignored the problems. Really, I just learned to live with the problems. Um, but anyways, for myself, and there was a talk in there about being forced to do things, that and I can relate again. Whereas growing up, I tried all sorts of different things. I did racquetball for a season. I tried judo for a season. I tried badminton and this and this and this. And I would take these little classes or courses or whatever to try these new things. But I think the problem that I ran into is that I didn't have anyone to do these things with. I struggled to make friends. My family wasn't interested in doing things with me. So ultimately, there was a lot of interesting things, but they weren't, I just didn't have the people to do them with. And, my family wasn't part of any sort of spiritual organization, any sort of leagues or clubs or this or that. So ultimately, when I went to participate in these things, uh, I didn't bring any friends away from it. I didn't bring any new connections or networking away from it. Um, so, so I guess that was a bit of a problem for me. And when she was talking about being, that maybe if someone had held her down like a fish, and eventually the fish gives up and quits struggling because it knows it can't win. It reminded me of an event when I was 3 years old, and I was at the hospital because I spent a lot of time at the hospital when I was in those days, because I had two parents smoking in the house and I was allergic to cigarettes. Instead of eliminating that from my lungs, they said I had asthma, and then I just had to be forced to live in a situation where I was always struggling to breathe. An asthma attack, I can only imagine, is very similar probably to being waterboarded. You know, I I I I used to wonder sometimes about waterboarding. I mean, why is that such a terrible torture? And I think it eventually clicked in me that I'd already been through it. That was my childhood, struggling for breath. So at one of my trips to the hospital, I had the experience of being the fish. For some reason, they wanted to take my temperature anally, and I'd always been very sensitive about my anus, and I didn't want that, and I struggled and I fought. I tantrumed, and they held me down to a stainless steel table, and I fought with all my might, and they pinned me down, and they anally penetrated me. And that may seem dramatic, but I was held down to a stainless steel table and anally penetrated. And at that point, once my sphincter had given up, there was a sensation that I can only describe as complete surrender. My physiology surrendered. And you know when you pick up a kitten by the nape of its neck and it kind of goes and is paralyzed, is seemingly paralyzed, and uh, in sort of a state of submission? That was kind of how I felt, but a very disgusting sort of way that something was inside me. And from that day forward, when I would have a bowel movement, it would take about 20 to 30 minutes. And, I had hemorrhoids from a very young age. But there was a sensation that I wanted everything out of me. And I went through life with this sensation that, if I sat there longer, that more would come out, that I just did not want things inside me. And I imagine there's some relation to that experience because it's very vivid. And the feeling that I went through is still very vivid as well. So, anyways, that was an experience that I kind of tied together for myself. That there was a sort of ADD, a jumping around looking for something I couldn't find. And I can agree that perhaps if I was more made to be more focused on certain things, I could have mastered many more things in my life. But anyways, again, a relationship, but or a relation. I just want to thank Anne. I mean, the way she's written her book in sort of a mosaic, has really inspired me that I don't necessarily have to get my thoughts as organized as I would like them to write my own memoir. And it was just such a nice journey to listen and hear the thoughts of someone who has suffered a similar traumatic event to myself, has gone through some of the challenges that 99% or 98% of the populace do not experience, do not need to think about, do not need to dwell on, empathize with, because they have their families as a taken for granted sort of situation. So again, so nice to be invited into her world, to hear her thoughts, to hear her talk about things that make her extremely vulnerable to attack, and to sort of wrap it up in a way that agrees with my own feelings and my own struggles and challenges. And so many questions left unanswered as to, you know, everything, everything, because we continue on, and I really enjoyed it. So, anyways, thank you very much, Anne Heffron, and I look forward to seeing more of your live chats and hearing more from you, and possibly having conversations about some of your experiences in the book and relating some of mine. And I hope to get more involved with the adoption community, and I'm sure I approach it like everything in life with a certain amount of fear of rejection, and at the same time a sort of stubbornness that I'm going to say what I have to say, and the worry of how those things will be received. But you know, as someone who's experienced something similar in life, I found it invaluable to read, and very validating that I'm not alone in a lot of my struggles and ironies that I face on a daily basis. Um, there was a lot of talk about um, natural and unnatural, but I can get into that more later. But again, I would highly recommend this book for any adoptee. There's so much there that's just brutally honest to relate with, and to help um, perhaps soothe some of your own self doubts about yourself as an adoptee and your value and your worth. And I've got to agree. And you're like, I have to agree with, I think it was Kevin, that you're a strong, powerful woman, um, and you've really shown it in expressing yourself here. So thanks, and we'll talk again soon.